We've got Shadow Moon Syndicates set up here on the table. Ryan and I just played, and we played a little bit into this so we can show you kind of a game in progress. This is the next game from Arcus. This is an interesting sort of area control game that's driven by some unique mechanics. What you're doing in the game may seem familiar in terms of manipulating your presence in a lot of different territories in many, many different ways, but how you're doing it feels a little bit different.
Yeah, so this right here is the Shadow Moon, and you'll see that it's divided up into all of these different districts where we're going to be placing these influence tokens, trying to control those locations for a variety of different reasons, ultimately to fulfill objective cards, but also to complete all of these operation tokens that are out here. And these are going to come out on the board in a unique way. Every single one of these operations is going to sit in between two spaces. So this is going to come between the maze and the underhive right here, and then you'll be able to influence them from either location. And there's always 5 of these on the board. There's some in-game scoring objectives. There's some personal objectives you have. So you really are trying to just score points in the form of money, but the game is going to change. How you get there is going to be different every single game because you're always using a different set of syndicate cards.
Yeah, there's different syndicates, and at the beginning you're going to get a number of those depending on player count, shuffle them all together, and those are the ones you have access to. Everyone's going to get a hand, and these come into play in a really interesting way, which is the card play of the game. One of the things you're going to be doing on your turn, in fact necessarily so, is playing or deploying an agent. When you deploy an agent, you do the top of their card, but if you deploy an agent from the same syndicate as the last agent that's on your stack, is what they call it, then you get to do the bottom as well.
Yeah.
And there are some ways that other players and yourself can manipulate what that top card is on your stack so that, oh, I thought I was going to play 2 more that matched, but now Ryan's put a different card on my stack, so now it's not going to match. I'm not going to be able to do the bottom of the card.
Yeah, I mean, if you're not getting it already just from hearing about that and even us talking about the board, this is a very, very heavy PvP game. This is a very take that game. A lot of what you're doing when you're playing cards, sure, you're adding influence out onto the board into different areas, and you are wanting to move your influence and hedge up your positions and protect yourself. But a lot of what you're doing is also messing with your opponents. You're pushing them out. You're eliminating their influence tokens. You're messing with their stacks so their combos aren't set up the way they wanted them to be set up. And you really are trying to pay attention to what other players are doing out here because, man, by the time it gets back around to you in a 5-player game, the board state has changed significantly because everybody is shuffling everything around out here.
Yeah, and why are you doing what you're doing out here? Well, like Ryan alluded to, we've got some objective cards out. Now, these objectives across the top of the board, in a 5-player game, there won't be any at the beginning of the game. In a 2-player game, there's 3 and then 2 more empty slots. Those are going to be looked at the end of the game. That's what we're going to score. So there's going to be some different territories where you want control and maybe a number of these operations tokens that you have to be able to score them really well. We also have some of those cards in our hand. And at the end of each of the 3 rounds, or at least the first 2, we're going to score 1 of those cards in our hand. So in the first round, I might be looking for violence operation tokens and trying to get as much influence in the maze as possible. If I succeeded in round 1, I might score this card because it's going to benefit me. It goes out the game. We do that again in round 2. Then the 3rd card is going to get added here in a 2-player game. So then we have 2 more public objectives for both of us, and we have some control over what those are going to be.
Yeah, it's interesting how this plays out in a 2 to 5-player game because in a 2-player game, like David just alluded to, you do start with 3 and you mark them. So we know the Spire, the Corp Sec, and the Supply Depot, these are going to be scored at the end of the game. You want to control these. And then we're each going to add 1 more. So, you know, maybe it's the same one and that becomes worth double points by flipping over. Or maybe we're going to be scoring 5 different ones. But in a 5-player game, you don't start with any of that information public. That whole tableau up there is empty. That's going to be made up of the 5 cards that we've decided to hold on to. So all while you're playing this game, you're looking at your cards and saying, well, David's collecting a lot of illicit operation tokens. I do not want my illicit operation to go up there because David's going to get, 5 or 6 points from that. I might just play this, cash it in, even though it's only going to give me 1 point, it stops it from being a public objective at the end of the game. I think that's a really interesting dynamic for how these objective cards work.
For sure, there's some head games there because the other thing that Ryan can do is look and see that I have a bunch of illicit operation tokens and think, well, he must be banking on playing an objective card like that at the end. So maybe I'll just shirt tail that and get some illicit objectives done as well. The objectives have a bunch of different types of categories, a bunch of different influence values, because you can grab those throughout the game. You're not just scoring points with those objectives at the end of the game. Throughout, you can grab these tokens at any time on your turn. You're going to take some steps. At one of those steps, you can optionally spend influence in an area to take one of those objective tokens, operations tokens, from the board in an adjacent sector. So like right here, blue could potentially spend all 3 of these influence to take this during their turn. And then they're going to have that operations token in front of them that they can flip at any time during the game to do an extra little power at the beginning of their turn.
Yeah, a lot of those, again, are manipulating the board, moving things, adding things, pushing things around. What's interesting is since these can be taken from either side, you're not just worried about who's controlling your location, you have to be worried about who's controlling the location next to you as well. And the other interesting thing about these tokens is you're spending all of yours. So if you're taking one that only requires 3 and you have a stack of 6, you're still spending all of your influence to take that. Now they do refund you. You get points for every additional influence. It might not be the best, like 1 point per, that's not great when you can maybe score a 5-point token later. So you really do kind of want to plan and use these cards to your best ability to manipulate this board until you have exactly what you need to complete one of these operations tokens.
Yeah, and when he says manipulate the board, we mentioned that earlier, and we won't go into all the different ways, but I do want to point this out. This isn't as simple as you can add and you can move.
Yeah,
you can do a lot of different things here. There's pushing, there's pulling. You can lock things down so no one can touch those particular influence tokens. All of this is going to happen on the cards. It's going to happen on some of those operation tokens that you gather. So you have a lot of opportunity on your turn to do a lot of unique things. Because some of these cards, this one says, add 1 influence to bio division, then sacrifice. What is sacrifice? Well, you look that up on this. Everyone has one of these. And sacrifice does something unique where you can get rid of 1 to maybe do something. Then if you played this after you'd already played one of these cards, you can do the bottom part as well. So each turn can be a pretty big swing. Yeah. Like you said, in a 4 or 5 player game,
a lot
if people chain that together, a lot can happen to the board.
Yeah, there are like 15 different keywords that can trigger that manipulate the board in different ways. And that's a big part of the game is timing with these cards because you are trying to kind of wanting to match these symbols like David mentioned. You can play a card to take its ability. If you play a following card that matches it, you get to do the bottom part as well. You can also play cards face down. If you don't have the right card you need, you can play one face down to add an influence anywhere. But you are kind of limited to what's in your hand. You're going to start every round with 6 cards, and we're going to play those 6 cards, and you just go around the table, each person playing a card at a time until you've played all 6 cards. But at the end of your turn, if you're looking at your hand and realizing you don't have what you need to make a good, strong turn, you can exchange one of the cards from your hand with any card available from the row. Of course, you have to really think about that because now if I put this one down here, I'm giving David potentially access to that card. On his turn, he can put one down to take that one. And so you're constantly weighing, do I want to keep this in my hand so nobody else has it? Or is this the time to ditch it for a card I really need? Of course, you might think you're setting something up and you're like, I need to match that symbol. But by the time it gets back around to you, somebody's made you discard this card.
Or put something else on top of it.
Put something else on top of it or switched it around with another player. So you can never really be dead set on what you're going to do on your turn. So there is a lot of reaction you're going to have to do to try to probably dig yourself out of the hole that your opponents put you in.
Yeah, it is a really interesting take on this sort of area control style game. And like we said, you're going to play each round, and by the end, you're going to have a sense of like, okay, here's how everything works. We're going to score those cards out of our hand, the objective cards throughout, and then you know exactly how all of these are going to score. So you're trying to devise a way to do well throughout, but also do really well in the end. And the other really cool thing about that is between rounds, you're going to take 3 cards from your stack. So you pick up your stack, you choose 3 of those cards, you set them aside. Round 2, you're going to do the same thing at the end of round 2. Those 6 cards are your 6 cards for round 3. So you can go, okay, I know what some of the objectives are out here. I'm going to stack my round 3 hand with a bunch for Supply Depot or a bunch for the Spire. Of course, everyone else is probably doing something similar to that.
Yeah, because you're scoring points. You're scoring points, we did mention this, not just from your objectives, not just from these operation tokens, but also every round. You're scoring points for all the areas that you control. You're getting money just for controlling some of these areas. So you might look at your hand and think, I just want a bunch that put it in the spire because I know the spire is going to score. But if everyone's doing that and you save ones that are not the spire and you just drop one in every spot, you can win a bunch of points just from controlling areas while everybody's fighting over the middle. So again, balancing that, you mentioned the mind games earlier, trying to think about, the 6 cards or so that people have in their stack. You know that 3 of those cards are going to be set aside. So you can try.
Although that's a lot to remember.
It is a lot to remember. So especially in a 5-player game, it's a lot to remember.
2-player, not so bad. And
Yeah.
speaking of 2-player, there is actually a dummy player named the Kingpin that you're going to be playing against, and it actually works. It's very streamlined. You're going to do this at the end of each player's turn. You just roll this die, and whatever this is, you're going to take a card from either the display, if it's a number, or if it's this little guy, which is Bob, you just take the top card, and the Kingpin plays this card. The Kingpin will only ever play the top portion of the card, but it's amazing how simple that system is and how much it actually changes what's going on out here, because each of us, as the 2 players in the game, are effectively utilizing the Kingpin for our own doing.
Yeah.
If it's at the end of my turn, I get to make all the decisions for the Kingpin. So it's effectively kind of like me taking my turn, but kind of not.
Yeah, because you don't get to control necessarily where the influence is going.
No.
All of these cards are going to put influence in some way on the board, and he has his own stack of influence that's going to go out. But if there's a thing that says, put it in the supply depot and one adjacent location, you get to choose the adjacent location. Or if it says place in the supply depot and then pull into the supply depot, you get to choose, do I pull mine or my opponent's or his?
You can really manipulate
kind of decide that.
a lot of different pieces of the influence, not just yours, but anyone's at the table. There are some cards that stipulate this is your influence and not anyone's, but there's a lot of things changing in this game, so it's a pretty dynamic road to the end. And then even at the end, it's going to be, I feel like at the end of the game, a lot of people are going to go, well, I'm done. Because everyone just moved all my stuff. Like going first and having everyone go after you on that very last round the table could be tragic for you.
It could be, but the game, it changes. It is dynamic. And the way, changing from a 2 to 5 player game of going from having information, and also in a 2-player game, it's just, you're just messing with your opponent, really.
Yeah.
But in a 5-player game, it's pure chaos in the best way possible. If you like that style of game where you would really enjoy that, pushing people around and moving their stuff and messing up their plans, this has that in spades.
This is what that game is. But if you have any more questions about it at all, please make them in the comments below. We'll get down there and answer whatever we can. Until next time, though, make sure everyone has fun at the table, and we'll see you then.